This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
Well, welcome everyone to tonight's Agile discussion groups. Tonight, we're glad that we have a speaker, Tom Perry, who will be delivering his topic here. As you can see, it's unlocking value, transforming metrics with goal-driven strategies. I did not know Tom previously, but I did hear one of his presentations on this particular topic, and I was blown away. And I think you will enjoy just as well. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to read his bio, I'm just going to read it very quickly here for those of you so you know who is presenting tonight. So Tom Perry is a storyteller. In his 25-year career as a software developer and architect, he has used his talent for storytelling to lead digital transformations, including at Visa, which resulted in a 30% decrease in defects and 60% faster time to market, and at USAA, where his exceptional coaching skill led the development team to delivering their first features 8 times faster than had been projected at the start of the project. Now, as an instructor and educator, Tom uses stories and real-world examples to inspire his students to see Agile and Scrum training as something they can integrate into their lives and work right away to create remarkable improvements, not just the efficiency of their work, but their own engagement and morale as well. So Tom, of course, even though it doesn't say in the bio here, Tom is also a vice president at Hyperdrive Agile. And so I want to welcome Tom to this presentation. And Tom, I'm going to hand the time over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And every time I hear that bio, I get all embarrassed and hot and sweaty. So thank you so much. That was great. And what I'm here to do today is to talk to you about really about how we do metrics and how we can orient our metrics more around value and really trying to orient them to the ways that we are trying to achieve goals within our organizations. And a little secret, just between you and me, I've done this wrong a lot. So I'm here to talk in honest terms about things that went well and maybe things that didn't go so well. So I know that bio was all pie in the sky and wonderful stuff, and I'm very proud of that. But for every success that I talk about in my bio, there are at least 2 or 3 failures along the way. And so I want to talk in very realistic and very practical terms about how this process works. And so hit me up with your questions, and I will be happy to answer them as we go through here. So with that, I'm going to skip over the bio page because the embarrassment is just killing me, and I'm going to move on. This is a quick introduction to Hyperdrive. We are in the training and consulting business. So we do all sorts of Agile training as well as OKR training and consulting for a variety of Fortune 500 companies. And I'll leave it at that. Wonderful folks. If you haven't met them, you should the next time you get a chance. So with that, let's start off with what the challenge is here, what we're dealing with. And a couple of things that you need to be aware of, if you're not already, is that metrics are tricky. Metrics are very tricky. And it turns out there are a few things you should be aware of. One is called Goodhart's Law. And if you haven't seen Goodhart's Law before, it states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, which is really unfortunate. We see this all the time, and I bet you have some examples of your own where, for instance, classic example, velocity. If you have a manager who comes into a team and says, boy, you guys aren't getting enough done. I was hoping, that team over there, they're getting 100 story points done in a sprint. What's going to happen to your team's sprint velocity? Oh, you guys are going to be getting 1,000 story points done the next sprint. I mean, that's easy. That kind of manipulation is something we all do all the time. And so we can change our story estimates. And as soon as we do that, the thing that we were trying to use velocity for, which was to estimate capacity, gets compromised. All of a sudden, it doesn't work as well. It's not as effective for us. The purpose gets lost. You could also talk about the number of stories per sprint. If you made a target out of those, what's the team going to do? They're going to start splitting those stories up into tiny itty bitty little stories, right? So people are smart, right? People are going to game the system anytime they can. And so we have to contend with this. And this makes coming up with metrics really hard. We're well-meaning, we're doing it for good reasons. Unfortunately, people are tricksy. Another problem, Campbell's law. And it turns out that Campbell's law states the more any quantitative social indicator is used for social decision making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures. It's really a variation on the same thing as Goodhart's law. And you know, I had this actually happen to me once. We introduced a metric, and the idea we were sitting around thinking, how can we get people doing more unit testing? So we came up with a metric we called running tested features. And running tested features meant that every time a feature went to production, we were going to check and make sure that that feature had a test associated with it, a unit test, so that we could increase the number of features in our product that were using automated unit tests. So far, so good. So I roll this out to the team, to a variety of teams. So I had probably a dozen teams that I was working with. And they all say, yep, we'll do this. Scrum Masters come back to me a couple weeks later, and they're like, Tom, they're faking it. What do you mean? They're putting in bogus tests so that they appear to have tests every time a feature is introduced, but the tests all pass every time. They all report true, no matter what. Oh no. So then I turn around and I go to the management team and I say, guys, we got to stop. We got to stop. This isn't working. They're gaming the system. There's no way this is going to work. And here's where I really got caught, because they looked at me, the managers looked at me and said, oh no, this is important. This is really critical. We need to have this metric. So now I'm stuck. Now I'm in trouble. So now I go back to the Scrum Masters, who are reporting a bogus metric to me every 2 weeks, lucky me. And I say, guys, keep doing what you're doing. They come back to me a week later. They're like, Tom, it's only getting worse. Oh, God. All right. So I looked at them and I said, here's the deal. You don't have to report the metric anymore. I'll take care of it. So the next time I go to the managers meeting, I sit down in the managers meeting and they say, how's that metric going? And I made up a number. That's right. I faked it. I said, it's out of control. It's going straight up. It's great. And I waited. I held my breath. And nothing happened. No decisions were made. Nothing happened. Okay. So it came back another 2 weeks later and they said, how's it going, Tom? Oh my God, it's terrible. It's gone through the floor. Nobody's doing it anymore. Well, Tom, you better fix that. Okay, thanks. Come back 2 weeks later, up, down, sideways, up, more, down. Every single meeting, not a single decision was made. Finally, my manager is bragging about me. Tom's doing a great job. He's introduced this great metric. It's shown great results throughout the organization. And I raised my hand. This was about 6 months later. It said, boss, I've been faking the numbers. Long silence. I'm not recommending this as a job retention strategy. So anyway, as the team looks at me, they're like, you mean that the numbers have been completely bogus? I said, yeah, they've been totally faked. And no one has made a single decision related to those numbers. If the number was high, no decisions. The number was low, no decisions. And at that point, everyone at the table said, maybe we should get rid of this metric. Maybe this metric isn't working. So you have to watch out, because if the metrics get gamed, the only thing tougher than people gaming the metric is managers who are desperately clinging to the metric. The other thing you get is the observer effect. The closer you monitor a metric, the more likely it is that will subtly influence people to maximize the measure. Have you ever had a team that said, boy, let's really crank down on velocity? Let's really get that, let's get that accurate. Let's get that as accurate as you can. And maybe the number goes down and you look a little closer and it goes down some more, and you look a little closer and it goes down some more. What's happening there is the observer effect. And that happens all the time. So there are all sorts of consequences for using poor metrics. You get ineffective development, inefficient development. You get poor decision making. You get customers who are unhappy. You don't detect important things that you're trying to detect. You waste resources. You lack alignment with the rest of the business, and you are probably encouraging poor morale and burnout. So that's pretty grim. This is pretty important stuff. Getting this right is important. What we're trying to achieve here is we're trying to align ourselves with the business. We're trying to enhance our focus. We're trying to create alignment with other groups, other departments. We're trying to create collaboration across groups. And ultimately, we're trying to outcompete the competition and increase our agility. Those are the things we're after. If there were a system, if there was a set of metrics that could help us do that, that would be ideal. That's what we're after. So when we start thinking about metrics in Agile context, we have to be careful. Agile frameworks are really good when it comes to team and product, and they tend to focus on those things over business performance. So teams are great and products are great, but at the end of the day, the thing that we're trying to do is improve the performance of the business. Agile metrics oftentimes completely leave that out. Ask people for the performance of the team, they'll tell you. Ask them for the performance of the product, they'll give you a number. Ask them if you made the business more profitable, and they'll give you a blank look. Agile metrics are often captured using terms that not everyone in the organization is comfortable with. If you try and use story points and velocity to demonstrate success to your executive team, you're very likely going to get a blank look. We have these special terms in the Agile world that people who aren't Agilists don't understand. And it makes it harder for them to relate to the metrics we're trying to use. And unfortunately, there can be a bit of an overemphasis on outputs rather than outcomes. And I've fallen victim to this before too. There was a team that I joined that when I joined them, they released 4 times a year. And they were considered, I was brought in because they were going very slowly. And after I'd been with that team for 1 year, they delivered 36 times that year. And of course, that looked great. Victory! We've managed to improve their performance. And somebody pulled me aside and said, hey, Tom, you know, I understand that doing this Agile thing and delivering all these little pieces is supposed to be good. And, you know, it doesn't feel bad. But I miss the good old days. I miss the good old days that when we pushed really hard and we delivered something, I felt like I made a difference. I felt like I delivered something valuable. Now we're releasing things that are so tiny, I don't feel like I've really helped anybody. And you know what? He was right. He was right. We had gotten addicted to delivering little pieces of stuff. And we had neglected to focus on how we had changed the behavior of our customers. So instead of changing behavior, we were just doing little tweaks, not really making a difference. But you know what? We were doing lots of stuff. We were very busy without making a significant difference. And if I were to go back and do it all again, I would release less and I would focus more on identifying the things that would change the customer's behavior. And of course, we all are probably familiar with the challenges of using metrics across teams. When you're using metrics at scale to measure products, when you're measuring across 4 or 5 or a dozen different teams, then you start running the risk of creating unfair comparisons. Why is one team's velocity faster than another team's velocity? That kind of comparison. And that's where things get really weird. We don't want that to happen. And some metrics like quality are frankly, they're hard to measure. And so they may require a lot of different measures, multiple different measures to really assess them. So there are traditional metrics you're probably familiar with. Everybody knows about counting lines of code. Yuck. Numbers of bugs fixed. There's another traditional metric. Utilization rates. Not very fond of that one either. Adherence to initial estimates, on-time delivery, percent complete. These are the classics. Probably pull these out of a PMP manual. What we need is something better. We need adaptable, goal-oriented metrics that are focused on outcomes, really focused on customer value rather than outputs. And they need to be the kind of thing, unfortunately, customer value doesn't sit still. It moves around. And so as such, we need to make sure that we're fine-tuning our metrics as customer value, customer preferences shift and move about. And of course, we want to keep the focus on the long-term versus the short-term gains. What are we in this for? We're in this to win the competitive battle. And the goals also should be the kind of thing that are shared across the business. And this gets lost time after time after time. They're just the goals for the development team, but they're not the goals for the marketing team. They're just the goals for the marketing team, but not for the sales team. And that leads to all kinds of internal conflict. So I want to start things a little differently. I want to start with goal setting. And one way of doing this would be starting with something like OKRs. The nice thing about OKRs is we start with our objective, our big, hairy, audacious goal. Starting here, we're talking about objectives for the entire company. And we're not overloading a whole bunch of them. We're keeping it fairly small, and they're bold, and they're ambitious, and they're the kind of thing that everybody can get on board with. And then, of course, we need some key results to go with. This is how we're going to measure our progress on these objectives. We're going to have a handful of these, 4 to 6 of them, and we're going to use them to demonstrate success or perhaps failure as we try and achieve these goals. The thing that I think oftentimes gets lost with OKRs is they're not just another goal-setting framework. They're not just another SMART goal. All too often, people look at OKRs and treat them just as another SMART goal, and that is incorrect. They are a framework. They're designed as a system to unify or get people to work across multiple departments. OKRs stay very high level within the organization, and they're the kind of thing that realigns teams so that they have to work together, realigns departments so they have to work together. They're not cascaded down to every individual. Then all you do is create a whole mess of these little goals that everybody has that align to nothing. And so the idea is we keep OKRs very high level. It's very intentional. And it's part of a system of collaboration where we use them in combination with other techniques like PI planning or big room planning, where we're pulling people together to agree on these goals, to realign on these goals, to achieve functional clarity on these goals, and then we go and we organize around them and we deliver on them. So they're more of a framework when you use them in the way I'm describing. They're the kind of thing where we need to have a consistent system to apply these, where we're going to, when we're doing our annual strategy with our executive team, we need to make sure that we're deriving our OKRs from our strategy. Once we've identified our OKRs, then we're going to take those OKRs to collaborative forums like I was describing, big room planning, that sort of thing, where people can come together and contribute to the development of those goals. Once we've arrived at a conclusion about what those goals are going to be, then we need to pull together plans to deliver on those goals. And then quarter by quarter, we deliver on those and go from there. And so it's all part of a system of developing the goals, managing the goals, and assessing the goals one step after another. The nice thing is this keeps us all focused on the business objectives rather than having a bunch of metrics that may or may not have any relevance at all to business objectives. If we start with a framework like OKRs, then we're always keeping ourselves aligned to the needs of the organization. The conversation is always in the language of the organization. And that's critical. That's the piece that often gets lost, especially in agile organizations. So here's an example of an OKR just for fun. Okay, it's a little vague. Create an awesome customer experience. And the key results, improve your net promoter score from X to Y, increase repurchase rate from X to Y, maintain your customer acquisition costs underneath this metric, whatever that may be. And so this is a way to keep it tangible and focused on the business need, not on the team's need, not on the product need, but the health of the business as a whole. After all, any given product may succeed or fail. We're interested in the success of the business as a whole. Another example of a simple OKR. Delight our customers, key results, reducing churn from one percentage to another, increasing your net promoter score, changing weekly visits, that sort of thing. So some ideas for how we would approach this. One is take a look at your products and your product life cycle and ask yourself, where are your products within the product life cycle? Are they in the beginning of the product life cycle, the growth phase, the maturity phase, or are they actually, mature and declining in the market? Because the metrics that we use and the assessment, the things we're trying to achieve are very different. When we're going in the introduction phase, we're not trying to make a lot of money. We're actually trying to get the product into people's hands and get them excited about it. So it's actually a very expensive time for those products. So we're not looking at efficiency. We're looking at, are we effective early on? As we get into the growth phase, that changes, and the maturity phase, that changes. So depending on where we are in the product life cycle, that changes the kinds of metrics that make sense. The product type. Some of the products that we sell are services. Some of them are digital products, iPhone apps, that sort of thing. Some of them are physical goods. Some are experiences, events, ideas even. The kind of product you have, again, or the kind of product that your company sells is going to determine what sorts of goals and what sorts of metrics make the most sense. And then there's a product delivery model. How do you deliver it to the customer? Does it go through a retail outlet? E-commerce? Is it a subscription? Is it freemium, on demand, direct to consumer? Each one of these has, you care about different things when you're looking at the metrics. And those metrics are not agile metrics when we're looking at those elements. When we're looking at traditional retail, we're trying to understand what the store experience is like. We're trying to understand where things sit on the shelf, whether or not they're getting attention. Very, very different from subscription or freemium models where SEO and other kinds of factors come into play. So how do we go about doing this? How do we move from these theories, Tom wildly waving his hands around, to the actual practice of implementing some of these metrics? First, probably making sure that people feel safe. Number one, if they don't feel safe with your metrics, and this is easy to get wrong, then they're going to game them. If it affects their paycheck, they're probably going to game it. One idea, and this came from a friend of mine a few years ago, was instead of imposing metrics on people, instead of imposing metrics on teams, bring the metrics to them or bring the need to them and ask them to provide the metric. Let them decide what metric makes the most sense. Let them decide what metric they believe in, and let them determine how they're going to measure and assess themselves. Another idea that I really like is simply starting small. Small metrics are beautiful. And drop a metric when it outlives its usefulness. And one idea for doing this is that final item. You can give your metrics an expiration date. I love that idea. Whatever you do, don't accumulate a lot of metrics. We want to be very focused on metrics that give us some view into the business value, into how the business is doing. That's the most important thing. How the team is doing, by comparison, is in some ways not nearly as interesting. The thing that we're really interested in is how is the business doing, and we have to keep that front and center. You're going to run into all kinds of changes as you try and do this, or challenges, I should say. You're going to get cultural resistance. Nobody likes to change, me least of all. You'll run into struggles with leadership buy-in and support. Confusion about the purpose of these different kinds of metrics. And balancing the need between short-term and long-term metrics. So there are a lot of challenges to introducing this stuff. Increased visibility, of course, is a double-edged sword. I put up a big metrics board that showed the current progress of all the teams, and I put it up in the lobby where everybody could see it coming into the office. I was immediately hated by all the teams. They were so angry they wanted to take it down themselves, simply because I had increased the visibility of what the teams were working on. And of course, we have to be careful about how we talk about the changes that we see, because some things will be improvements and some things won't. We're going to have to iterate on this over time, and metrics are the kind of thing, one of the more dynamic things that we have to contend with. Unfortunately, they don't change often enough, in my opinion. We need to be looking at things like customer satisfaction, revenue, performance, marketing. All of these things come into play, and they're interwoven, and they're changing constantly. So at the end of the day, what we're doing here is trying to measure the things that matter the most. We're trying to align our metrics to the goals of the business. It's not enough to align just to your product. It's not enough just to align just to your team. It needs to align to the goals of the business. That's what success looks like. We want to look at there are some different techniques we can use to do this. I mentioned scaled OKRs. You can also look at things like your product type, delivery model, and life cycle. Those can all play into deciding what is meaningful for metrics. And then finally, we have to rinse and repeat, make mistakes and get rid of metrics and try new metrics. We need to be constantly experimenting with our metrics. It has some long-term benefits, some real promise for us. I think it can help us enhance our focus on value delivery. It certainly improves our alignment. It improves our collaboration across teams. Again, metrics and goals should be shared. They should be something that we all care about. And ultimately, that's going to help us sustain our competitive advantage and increase our agility and adaptability. So, if there's one message I could leave you with today, it would be that when you think about metrics, think beyond the team, way beyond the team, and look for the organizational or product level goals to guide you. That's where you're most likely to find the most useful metrics, the most beneficial metrics that'll benefit not only you, not only your team, but the company as a whole. So thank you very much for your time. You guys have been great. The Hyperdrive offers a bunch of trainings. I do a lot of them. So if you're interested, we're offering a 20% off promo code. It's down at the bottom there, Tom20H or Tom HD20. I think that's an awesome promo code. And so you're welcome to use that and come join us at any one of our trainings. And whew, I have been on a tear. I have moved really quickly. For that, I apologize. And what questions do you have?
Well, thanks for that presentation, Tom. I'm going to open the floor now. Does anybody have any questions at this time? And so while some of you are thinking about the questions, let me just kind of ask this: is that if you're suggesting that having changing metrics depending on where you are in the product life cycle,
Mm-hmm.
then I mean, how do you track that then? Like how do you know? Because life cycles are not necessarily always that clean. That we're now from one's product life. We're now in this particular stage of the life cycle.
They're
How do you
fuzzy.
handle those types of transition periods?
Mm-hmm. The honest answer is uh, I have when I have encountered this, so I've had brand new greenfield products. And when you do that, there isn't much transition. You jump into it, and what you do, what happens is you go into, and I was in a small organization at the time. And we introduced this product, and the first thing the executive team says is, well, we need to assess the profitability of this product. And that's great and all, except if you're a brand new product, profitability is the farthest thing, right? You're nowhere near profitable. And in fact, you're just a large, advertisement for burning money. And so you go into that conversation, and what we had to do was um, really reorient everyone in the room to say, hey, look, you're going to have to think about your metrics differently. The metrics that work for that successful product, that cash cow that we've been working on for the last 10 years are not the same that we should be using on a brand new product. Now, I've never been, I don't, have I? Was going to say I've not gone from greenfield to like growing, or I've a little bit of that. And I never had to worry too much about it because as we did that, making that transition, um, if you are starting to, you're all you're really focusing on is getting customers at that point. Um, Once I have worked on products that were very, very successful, and in that situation, we were making the transition, which is really hard, into a product that was sort of end of lifing. And when that happens, just between you and me, it wasn't graceful. There's a whole lot of denial. Honestly, when you have teams that are working on a product that's end of lifing, it's a grieving process, if I'm honest. It's nobody wants to acknowledge that this product is not as competitive as it once was. So I'd love to give you a story of a graceful transition, but unfortunately, my experience has been that it's a lot of denial. And so It's fun. It's all fun and games when everybody's making a lot, growing a product. But man, when you hit the top and go down the other side, that is not a fun roller coaster. That's, and is there a right and wrong answer there? There needs to be, I think the hard part is to be honest with folks and start being that doubting Thomas saying, look, I think we're on the wrong side of the curve here, folks. I think we need to start adjusting and thinking about things differently. And that's a tough voice to be. Nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely imagine. Especially, I didn't even think about the end of life stage of the product, but I was just thinking of the usual transitions. But
Yeah.
I can definitely see how that the latter stages can be
Mhm.
particularly tricky. Anyway, I'm gonna assume that if you turned your mic on, you want to have a question. I don't know what order these came on, so I'm just gonna call them as I see them here. Luis Vasquez, did you have a question for Tom?
Uh, I did, and it was, I think he partially answered the question that's basically, at what point do you sort of just switch metrics and just shut them off and say, this metric is no longer useful?
Oh, yeah. Um, it's gonna there are gonna be a lot of different things that would cause me to do that. One is if the customer or the business is changing. For instance, if you go through a big change, we all went through the pandemic, for example, and that had huge impacts on a lot of different products, right? And so that would be one of those times when taking a long, hard look at, the metrics that you have and asking, are these the right ones? For instance, face-to-face time. Ooh, yikes. Um, so um, so I guess that's one time when it's definitely time to change. Um, and I think the other is the idea behind metrics is that we're using them to learn. So we start off using a metric and it's a guess. It's always a guess. We think this will help us discern when we're doing better, when we need to intervene, when we can do something useful. And you try it out and see what happens. And sometimes it works great. And sometimes you come back and you realize, no, this isn't hitting it. This isn't doing it. And so you need to try something. You need to switch quickly. I would rather move quickly to another idea, another metric, than stay too long, linger too long on a metric that's ineffective.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see also Tom Osucha, you have your microphone on. You have a question for Tom?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Tom, I heard you say, I think that you were saying everyone should understand or at least be able to see how a metric impacts what they're doing. Is that what I heard?
I think so. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so the reason I'm asking the question is I know from a sprint planning or from a sprint team, so from your teams, they're focused on delivering what the stakeholder or stakeholder, in this case the business sponsor, business owner, has defined, which would be the person answering those OKRs. My question is, how does the team relate to that? Because they're focusing on what was defined as the priority for the backlog and the work that they're doing. And I'm trying to
Mhm.
understand how that doesn't affect their ability to complete their task in that sprint,
Yeah.
while the business owner probably has the responsibility of saying, how do I answer to the fact, does this bring the business value? Do I have the right priorities?
Mhm. So it depends on how you do it, but the short answer is that first of all, of course we want the product owner to be in alignment with whatever those goals, whatever those business metrics are.
Hmm.
So that's a good start because they're going to set the priorities
Right.
based on that. They'll set the priorities for the team, and then the team will be able to pick up those priorities and match the expectations of the product owner and the rest of the business with regard to that goal. I'm going to say there are kind of two, my experience with OKRs and with that kind of goal setting is that there are two approaches to it. One is to keep the goals very, very high level, to not roll them down at all, but to keep them high level and let everyone have to figure out how they align to those. And it means some reorganization to do that. And then they develop their plans and execute on their plans based on whatever that is. So that means you have to get everybody together collaboratively to discuss the goal and figure out what that's going to look like and how they're going to coordinate together across different departments, that kind of conversation. We can bring the team into that conversation, and that's great. That might be one place to do it. Now, as the makers, as the doers, I guess I lean towards bringing everybody in the room. I'm an aging hippie, and so I've got Birkenstocks on right now, and so I like to bring everybody in. I'm the kind of guy who wants to bring a larger audience in so that everybody hears it at once. Everybody contributes to the goal at once. Everybody suggests changes to the goal at the same time. I do not like it when it turns into leadership and then next layer down and next layer down, because you tend to get this weird distortion taking place as the story is told and retold and retold. And yeah, so, but there are folks who try and, sort of scale it that way. And that's more of a personal preference when it comes to how organizations like to, well, how their organizational leadership style works.
Got it. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that.
Okay, I'm going to go to the chat group now. Jeff Capone, you put a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to ask it yourself. If you do, feel free to turn on your microphone and your camera, Jeff.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Jeff.
Hey, Tom, thanks for the presentation. So the question is not only the collection of the metrics, but more importantly, the representation of that data, the dashboarding. So do you have examples that you can share with us around some of the best approaches you had in terms of representing the data? Well, one of the struggles that I've recognized is you put the data out there, people interpret it different ways without the voiceover. So
Yeah.
what experience do you have in representing the data appropriately?
Yeah, now I make no warranty that the way I did it was right. But what I did when I did the dashboard example, I was looking to get out of somebody said, Tom, you're the PMO, and I was like, oh God, how do I get out of this job? And so they wanted me to provide status reports on every project in the organization, every couple of weeks, which is just a nightmare job. And so in order to get out of that, I created a web app that basically polled, we were using Rally at the time, and it polled every single team's current project and asked, how many stories have you committed to for the sprint? How many stories do you have in the sprint? And how many are complete? So it basically would give completion status on the number of stories. Very simple, very crude. And yet, you could ask questions like, well, if you're halfway through the sprint, do you have half the stories done? Do you have fewer than half the stories done? Do you have more than half the stories done? And you could basically, using a simple algorithm, assess whether or not the team was behind, at pace, or ahead of where they should be. And so that's all I did. I reported is the team where they would be if they were 25% done with the sprint, 50% done with the sprint, 75% done with the sprint. I'm almost embarrassed to give you these metrics. And the answer actually was all that the executives wanted. The executives just wanted to know if things were on track. That's it. And it turns out that did the trick. Now, you could now look at the board and say, well, that team is 50% done with their work and they're 50% through the sprint. So we are good. They're golden. And if they had impediments, we'd flag them. So if there were any impediments, the team had a mechanism to flag them. Otherwise, everything was good. And really, just between you and me, that's not all that far from your typical red, amber, green project status that you give to executives all the time. The cool thing was I no longer had to do it. The cool thing was if an executive said, Tom, what's the status? I would point at the monitor and let them figure it out because it was right there all the time. It was live. It was updated every 15 minutes. So I no longer had to do those bloody status reports and all of the creative storytelling that went along with it, which was a creative form of lying. And so to me, that simplicity, that ability to simply say, we said we get 10 things done in this sprint. We're halfway through the sprint. We should probably be somewhere around 5 things done at this point, is all we did. I hope I didn't horrify you there.
Nope, thank you.
Okay, I see Maven's been very patient with his microphone on. Maven, you want to ask your question to Tom?
Yes. So, Tom, you assumed OKRs and you also assumed buy-in from leadership. So, what were the challenges?
I don't know if I assume that.
I mean, OKRs have to be at a high level. So,
Yeah.
to be at a high level, they have to come from the C-suite.
Yeah.
And without the C-suite buy-in, this whole thing is not going to fly.
True.
So,
True. I wouldn't even, and if you're talking about goal setting, yeah, without a doubt. Other metrics, product metrics and product level metrics, it's you might be able to work a little bit lower down. But yeah, no. And look, without executive buy-in to whatever you're doing here, I mean, these are metrics executives should care about. These are goals executives should care about. So without that buy-in or without that alignment with the executives, well, then you're in bad shape to begin with. Right? Then you're in a very problematic space. So I would say that it's almost a necessity that we wrestle with this, because if we don't, then we're out of alignment. Which also implies that maybe they're using some mechanism, some goal setting mechanism that maybe we don't like, that maybe we're not happy with, that maybe imposes, that causes problems for us, that suffers from Campbell's law or Goodhart's law. In which case we want to escalate those things and see if we can get them addressed. But nevertheless, we're looking for alignment in the organization. So it's not the kind of thing that we can do in one division. We can't get this right in IT and not get it right in marketing, and not get it right in sales, and not get it right in finance. We cannot do this in isolation. Does that make it more challenging to get that kind of buy-in? Absolutely. But it's mandatory. I mean, how can you achieve this alignment without doing that?
yeah, and it particularly will be challenging if you have an organization that is in multiple businesses.
God, yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The bigger the business, the harder it gets, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Small company, it might be easier to implement.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. I would completely agree with you.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a question also from Michael Zvobo. I'm not, Michael, do you want to turn on your mic and ask Tom your question yourself? Is Michael on? Okay, maybe I'll ask Michael's question. And again, I don't know if it's Michael's was with measuring, because I don't really understand the question, Michael. But Michael typed here, says, thanks, Tom, for newly certified PMPs with no agile experience. What's your advice for breaking in? I don't know if this is a career related question or for in terms of, I'm not sure exactly what breaking in is. So Michael, if you're able to, if you can turn your microphone on, maybe you can clarify the question for us. Okay.
I'm willing to go out on a limb on this and say If you have no Agile experience and you're looking to, if breaking in means working in an organization that has Agile teams, the short answer to breaking in or getting into on the ground floor is say yes to everything. Say yes to every opportunity that comes along. As a consultant, oftentimes I've had to do that, where opportunities came along that maybe weren't quite right or didn't feel like, necessarily maybe the pay wasn't what I was looking for, or the opportunity wasn't something that fit my idea of the perfect gig. But I would say yes to everything because I wanted the opportunity to get in, to get the experience, to get things going. And so if I could go back and talk to young Tom, who was trying to break in, I'd tell Tom to smile more and say yes.
Okay, I hope that answered your question, Michael. I see Jack Lafati, you have your hand up. You want to turn on your camera, your microphone, ask your question, Jack?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Tom. Thank you for that. I found that very helpful. So a question for you. In terms of metrics, when,
Mm-hmm.
when you're managing an agile project and you're making deliveries to the client, in terms of the reference that you make in your slides to organization, does that
Mm-hmm.
client, is the organization the client that you're trying to align to? Or are you trying to align to all three, meaning the organization that you work for and the
Right. Right. You're definitely trying to, my reference, I think, is much more towards the organization that you're in.
Mhm,
But the client is important too. And there are things like the pace with which the client can accept deliveries. If
mhm,
you're working in healthcare, they're very intolerant of frequent deliveries. On the other hand, if you're developing an iPhone app, you can release, hundreds of times a day and nobody even notices.
mhm.
So you get a wide spectrum there in
Okay.
turn, you know. Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah, it does. So just to give a little more context, this is a software development project, so we're delivering incremental pieces of software to the client. I'm in
Mm-hmm.
a situation where there's a quality problem, where we're
Mm-hmm.
delivering things to them, they're finding quality issues. So I'm trying to develop metrics um, around that to try to improve the quality. They're questioning our testing. We're doing a lot of testing, but they're still finding issues. What kind of
Mm-hmm.
metrics do you recommend in that type of situation? In terms of metrics that a project manager can put together to help that type of situation.
Golly, there are a lot of different defect metrics, like things like mean time between failures, for example, in certain kinds of systems. So those are uptime metrics. So there are a lot of
Mhm.
different quality metrics to choose from. I would tend to, I guess, my knee jerk on that, and this could be wrong, is to look at the defects that are coming in and categorize them and see what and you could sort of do an 80/20 on them and say, okay, where are the majority of these defects coming from? And if they are performance defects or they are, it's going to depend on what they are, but then you can zero in and say, okay, I can look for a measure that matches that particular attribute because I think, if I'm understanding correctly, there can be a wide range of different ways of measuring. My experience with QA metrics is that there's plenty.
So a lot of the things that they're calling defects were unclear requirements, but
Okay.
yeah, they
Yeah.
still call them defects, even
Uh,
though, we try to align on that. But yeah,
mhm.
a lot of requirements that we think we understand, and then when we deliver, even though we have, supposedly accurate descriptions and acceptance criteria, uh,
Yeah.
when we finally deliver, then they'll find something that they think is inaccurate, and they call that a defect.
So that suggests to me that we want to, in a case like that, you want to embrace the customer as closely, or the client as closely as and tightly as you can. And you want to improve the feedback loops as much as possible. So if you're operating with longer cycle times, shorten those cycle times as much as you can. Close the distance between you and the customer as much as you can. Even to the point of, if you could create a situation like the old XP guys did, where the customer is in the middle of the team, that kind of thing. So those sorts of strategies, I'm actually would be less inclined to say that's a metrics problem, and more inclined to say that that is a feedback problem. And so getting closer and tighter with the customer is probably going to be more meaningful, I'm guessing. Just
Yeah.
guessing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the feedback, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw Jeff, you had popped on your microphone, and do you have a follow-up question for Tom?
But I was just going to share with Jack some of the, if we can afford the time, just some of the experiences I had related to that. And it goes aligned with what Tom was saying. So the first thing around defect management is, one, you need to acknowledge and have some sort of defect management process in place, which means as you're going through your testing, when there's a defect, a TIR, a bug, it needs to be acknowledged and then represented accordingly. One of the things that I've learned over time, and I think you guys were getting there with the conversation, is as I go through my different phases of testing, if I am having the same bug or defect recur, I identify that as what I call defect leakage, and that represents a problem. And the problem could be stemming from many different areas. Likewise, if I see a defect or a production incident once I deployed, the first inclination I have is I go back to, was that thing tested? How was it tested? Or was it a lack of requirements or clarity around requirements? So the first thing that I'm sure you're doing is identify defect management system, acknowledge all defects, categorize them appropriately. If you see the same defects happening in subsequent testing phases, you have one issue. If you see issues in production and it relates back to something you did not test, then you need to go back to the clarity of the requirements as well. But first thing is just making sure you capture all the defects, which I'm sure you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the feedback.
Okay, we have time for one last question. If there's any questions from anybody, care to get in one last one for Tom? I'm looking here. Diana, I see you popped on your microphone. You have a question for Tom?
No, but I have some advice on engaging the customer. Had
Okay.
very similar situation as well, and I found that having them assist with input on the test plans made a huge difference, because they felt like they were a part of the testing without being a part of the testing, but at least with creating those test plans, and we had a better starting point of knowing what they were looking for to try to help trap some more of those perceived bugs or issues prior to releasing the software to them.
Yeah.
So that might be another thing you might want to try, Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. Yeah, we're struggling with getting them to review and approve the story descriptions and the acceptance criteria ahead of time. And then they have a knack for trying to change requirements in the middle of sprints. So it's a particularly challenging project from that respect. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Thanks for the feedback.
Okay,
Good
that
luck.
will have. Okay, yes, good luck, Jack. That's going to have to be the last one. Now, we're going to end the recording in just a moment, and we'll go through 15 minutes of just unrecorded time. But first of all, I want to once again thank Tom for delivering this presentation tonight. It's a very important discussion, for Agilists. I know that. I know that people who are familiar with Agile always thinks that Agile is a little bit too like loosey-goosey and whatever, as opposed to the rigidity of waterfalls. So a very important topic. So thank you very much, Tom, for presenting to us.